In 1942 we had British RAF pilots flying over Nazi Germany on one of their many bombing raids, and on one occasion they saw a bright light in the sky, and one of the pilots, to his credit, reported this to the Air Admiralty, which later became the Ministry of Defence. Between 1942 to 1945, Nazi Germany were accelerating very fast in the scientific world. I saw a programme only last week of some remains from the Second World War on the Polish-Czechoslovakia border. It's now called the Czech Republic, and they had some huge pillars which were circular, and the general consensus of this programme was that the Nazis had been creating saucer shape planes. We would call them UFOs. By 1945 there was a mad rush between the Americans and the Russians to gather as many of the German scientists as they possibly could do. By 1969 man was on the moon. Of course, by 1945 the bomb was dropped on Japan. How did it all happen? I've often asked myself, why was it the Germans were so advanced when it came to Britain and America and other nations? What did the Germans have that Britain and America didn't have? What we do know is that the Nazis were very much into the occult, especially horoscopes. Hess had been raised in a very superstitious family, and he would read his horoscopes every day. His astrologer said to him, if you go to England, you will make peace with the British and they will become allies with the Nazis. He got on his plane, he flew to the UK, and he was arrested, and he died under suspicious circumstances many years later. His astrologer was wrong. Adolf Hitler was also very much into the occult and into astrology. His horoscopes told him that by 1933 he would decline. And of course history tells us otherwise. 12 years later, 20 million people dead, and he's put a bullet in his head in a bunker in Berlin. I'll come back to that in a minute, because I think that the key to understanding all of the UFO sightings that we see in the world today lies with Nazism. There's something to do with the Nazis and the occult. 1947, America, Area 51. Something happens near Roswell. Some object comes out of the sky and it crashes. The American Air Force put different stories out. Some say it's a weather balloon, others say a spaceship has crashed and aliens have been found on board. Different stories. What we do know now is that the Americans were spying on Russia throughout the whole of the Cold War. As a distraction to stop the Russians realizing what the Americans were doing, we believe that some form of spaceship was created. We know by 1964 that the Americans had spaceships which could really move. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's a very elaborate cover story to keep the Russians focusing on the sky, while of course at 40,000 feet, I think it was, the US Air Force are flying over Russia taking photographs. Also, Antropov, who was head of the Russian KGB, ordered the Red Army for 13 years to look up at the sky. That's 7 million soldiers are regularly looking up at the sky to see what's going on. It's my belief that the Nazis, with the occult, with unclean spirits, with probably the devil himself, were given the secret to unlocking a lot of the mysteries which we didn't have pre-1947. From 47 to the present 2010, we have rapidly advanced. Man on the moon, satellite television, cordless phones, the internet, it goes on and on and on. Pre-47, you're fighting a very primitive war, Spitfires, Lancaster bombers, and overnight, well, within 20-30 years, you got stealth bombers. I would say that 90% of these so-called UFO sightings are government, because we are still spying on Russia, and we are still spying on China and Iran and all the other nations of the world who are not friendly with the West. That leaves 10% unexplained. We know from history that Christopher Columbus in the 15th century en route to America saw something in the sky, some object which he reported down. We know that the Egyptians, even further back, have got writings or drawings on their walls of objects. 10% is unexplainable, which I would say falls under demonology. I won't rule it out completely. Ezekiel 1 is cited by certain Christians as a form of a UFO. I looked at the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel last night and this morning. I read some of my Bible commentaries, and the general consensus, and I agree with this, is that they were cherubims that Ezekiel is writing down. They have wings. As far as I know, no alien has ever been reported as having wings. So I don't fall into that camp of Ezekiel 1 being a UFO. The key goes back to the Nazis. They had the brains, they had the know-how, they also had the friends, they had the help of the realm of darkness, prince of this world. So I just want to give you those thoughts to keep in mind. I may come back and do another video on this whole area of the occult. But what we did also learn from this program I watched a few weeks ago was, I think it was last month, a plane took off from Area 51, flew across America, across the UK, across Europe, China, Russia, back to America. It was going at 8,000 miles an hour. And they know that from weather maps. Was a human on board? We don't know. Possibly, possibly not. Either this information has come from man's own achievement, and you've got to think, why is it for 2, 3.5, 4,000 years you've got man, horse, cart, living a very simple, primitive life right up till the mid-1940s. Something changed, and by 1948 Israel was back in the land. There's a lot going on here, and I am very much a believer that the Lord is still very much in control today, as he always has been. So, in closing, I'm going to say that I believe 90% of UFO sightings are down to government involvement, government designs, and the 10% I'll leave under demonology, and I'll come back to that another time. Going to sign out now. Wish you all the very best, and Maranatha.